Good afternoon. It is Saturday, January 19th, 2019, and it is time for another update on the progress of my HOn3 Rio Grande Southern narrow gauge model railroad. It's been a little over a month since I last updated you, and I've made some progress. I think I had just finished the bench work on Ridgeway and had been laying track there. But you can see that I've got much of the Ridgeway yard already in place, scenic and wired. So I have those kill switches installed, and I am now beginning to plan out the Ridgeway engine terminal. I'm trying to follow the actual track arrangement at Ridgeway, and clearly I'm going to have to build the Ridgeway engine house, which is fine, but I'm going to end up making it a few fewer stalls. I don't think I'm going to make the full, I think there were 7 stalls, something like that. I'm going to build between 4 and 5 stalls, so we'll see. In the foreground here, you see a couple unfinished projects. There's my brass business car B20, also known as the Edna, and a half-finished precision scale short caboose that's going to become RGS 0401. In the meantime, you can see how I've got this laid out. Here's the Denver and Rio Grande Western interchange track. Got a staging track here, passing siding, and here's the main line. That tank back there, that's just a stand-in. That's an old Atlas tank. It's not going to be the one that actually goes there. I'm building the Banta Model Works Ridgeway tank that's going to have no roof on it. He actually provides a little, what do you call it? He provides a piece of plexiglass that actually looks like the water level in the otherwise roofless tank. So I'm going to go ahead and build the tank topless. And there's a number of other ancillary structures that I need to build for Ridgeway. So I've made some changes to the plan for the railroad. For example, this stockyard was going to be in Placerville, but the more I tried to think about how I would operate the layout, the more this little stock pen on a stub siding in Placerville was going to be a problem. First off, it would be a facing point move for a Ridgeway-bound stock train coming up from Rico, which would make switching it out very difficult. It also was going to share a siding with an oil dealer, which it did in real life, actually. The Placerville stock pens and the oil dealer were on the same spur, but it was really going to complicate operations to the point where it was also going to be kind of pointless because it's such a small stock pen. So I moved it here to Ridgeway, where there was an actual stock pen, and it's really more going to be a scenic element, although it kind of represents the receiving stock pens at Ridgeway and Montrose that a lot of the RGS stock trains would have used. Placerville itself has undergone a lot of changes. Originally, I was going to put the town here, which would have been both in the wrong place relative to the tracks, meaning I would have had it on the west side of the train tracks rather than the east side where they really were, and the main drag was going to have to be perpendicular to the tracks. Well, I finally figured out that if I move my mountains around a little bit, I can actually put Placerville exactly where it really belongs, which is roughly parallel to the train tracks and behind the town on the east side, which is exactly where it belongs. The thing I'm going to have to change is this spur, which is also, this is the programming track, and I'm going to have to bring it down this way, sort of in this direction, so it's going to go straight this way, and then the road's going to come along here. So that does have to be changed, and that's somewhat of a non-trivial task because not only is that just a spur, but it's also the DCC programming track, so there's some wiring I'm going to have to move. But not a big deal. Worth it to get a much more accurate version of Placerville and open up some potential sort of open running space here, which I don't have a lot of on the layout, and I really wanted to kind of have some of that open rolling farmland that you would have seen up along Dallas Divide and areas between Placerville and Ridgeway. And of course, coming into Placerville, I still have to build the Placerville Depot, so that hasn't happened yet. I did add the Placerville warehouse. I don't remember if this was on my last update, but this is a Walters kit that I weathered up to look like the RGS freight warehouse at Placerville, which actually it's about an 80-90% match. So I'm pretty happy with how that came out. And then coming through here, I was originally, I think last time I was talking about putting a spur right here. I decided against that. I just didn't want to clutter up the area. I may still put the Tibble in here. And then the other thing I need to do is I think I'm going to put a tank right here, a water tank. Because I realized from an operational perspective that I don't have any water tanks between Ridgeway and Rico with the current plan. And so I don't have that added element of requiring crews to stop for water, which would be a much more realistic exercise. Moving along, I really haven't made any changes to the Windy Point area other than adding a few extra details. Some old discarded railroad ties that apparently were scattered all along the right-of-way in the real Windy Point area of the RGS. Little extra talus on the slopes, and lots more trees. You will note that I don't have any deciduous trees yet on the layout. At some point I'm going to have to sit down and make a lot of aspens, cottonwoods, and other such indigenous deciduous plants. But for now, it's mostly pine trees, and it still kind of does the job for now. Bridge 45A, no significant changes there. I did come into having a bunch of probably prototype era vehicles here. So it turns out our local hobby store, which is Roy's Model Trains in downtown Colorado Springs, had a bunch of these old HO scale 30s and 40s cars, and so I kind of bought them in bulk, and so now I've got lots of vehicles, and he's still got some left, and if you want them, go get them, because I'm probably going to buy the rest. Coming into Ophir, no surprise, I've made absolutely no progress at Ophir. Eventually I'll get to it. I've started looking at how I'm going to construct the buildings here. So this was an older version of the quality store, and at the time I started scratch building this in high school, and I couldn't read in the photograph that I had what it actually said, and I saw a map that had indicated there was a store called Buckley in Ophir back around the turn of the century. So it turns out it should say quality store, and I'm not actually going to use this scratch built. I might just basically cannibalize it for the windows and stuff, because I have the Banta kits that are much more accurate for both the quality store and Mrs. Skillen's store, which is going to have to go here. The challenge is after laying the tracks, I realized I didn't have enough depth for the full kit. So I'm going to have to narrow the kit a little bit, and there's going to be a hillside here. This whole backdrop is temporary. I'm going to have to raise this up, and I have one that's printed at twice the size, so you're really going to have a view of the Ophir needles kind of dominating over the town. So that's something I'm going to be installing at a later date. Coming through Ophir again, no major changes here until you get to Lizard Head. Now Lizard Head, I've been doing a lot more of the foreground scenery. I still have to figure out how this transition is going to work between the backdrop and the foreground scenery, but I'm getting there. I've added a lot of yellow grasses to match the yellow grass on the backdrop. I've toned down the green. It kind of looks green on my phone right now, but in person it's a little yellower, so that there we go. Okay, so that the colors kind of are better matched to the backdrop. I did end up scratch building, ta-da, the actual section house that was at Lizard Head, including reproducing the famous Lizard Head sign, which still exists today at the Colorado Railroad Museum. Fortunately, I had the Mike Blazek plans in the RGS storybooks. Now, while the plans don't have any dimensions to them, in a separate part of the book, they mention the actual dimensions of the structure. So based on those dimensions and using what would have been 12 by 12 bridge timbers, I was able to get the dimensions pretty close to accurate on this thing. So I'm pretty proud of how dimensionally correct this is. And I made it look like it did probably in the mid-40s. Mine actually, as weathered as it looks, is probably in better repair than the real structure was. And again, here's my Lizard Head peak, which really doesn't belong here. It should actually be over my shoulder, but again, it kind of gives off this RGS vibe. Now, here's some more scenery work. So I've been adding these red bushes. I don't really know what they are. I don't know if this is fireweed, or I see this on our side of Colorado as well. But since they're on the backdrop, I tried to match them so you can see this is kind of what it looks like finished after I added some additional Scenic Express materials. And here's one that I haven't finished yet. This is just, these are Bachman. I forget what they're called, but they come from Bachman. And I'm adding some different colors to kind of tone them down, and some different colored leaves. So they're going to hopefully match the backdrop better. But this corner is relatively new. So the last time when I had the update, there was a couple pieces of styrofoam stacked here, and that was it. So if I pan up this way, you can see I've kind of scenic all in this corner from the layout edge. And sorry, I do need to touch the fascia back up because I had some glue drippages and spillages, and I had to sand this down quite a bit because I had basically a rivulet of glue that went down. Thankfully, I used drop cloths. But anyway, this is sort of a cut, so it's supposed to kind of represent the terrain between Gallagher and Rico. Rico, I've been working on quite a bit. I've started settling in the Propatria mill. It's just still kind of sitting there, so I still need to dirt it in. You can see there's some gaps, and it's not sitting perfectly straight, so I'm going to level it out and fill in the scenery there. There's going to be a big old tailings pile over here to match the color of the tailing pile on the backdrop. But oh, and then, of course, I have the Banta public coal bin, which is also prototypical for Rico, where I'm departing from prototype. Last time I showed you, I started building some town buildings for Rico, and I'm putting them kind of on the wrong side of the tracks, but I wanted to sort of have this view looking down the tracks, and I really like how this looks. It has that old Colorado mountain town look to it. A couple of Grant Line. These are the Reese Street house kits from Silverton. So the correct architecture, just not in the correct location. There were actually some houses on the west side of the tracks between the railroad and the Dolores River, but they were south of the yard. So, and in my case, they're north of the yard. Moving along into Rico, major progress here. So at long last, I had to finish up some projects that I'd started a long time ago and never finished. This is the Durango press kit for the Rico water tank. So I detailed it to look like the Rico water tank. And I realized after I built it that there shouldn't be any slack in those spout chains, but you know what? It's done. I'll just remember that for next time. The Rico Depot, no real changes there. The other big ticket item that I finished for Rico is last time you saw parts of a wall propped together for an engine house, and then I also had started doing the interior bracing. Well, the engine house is done. Okay, these are Monster Model Works doors. These are built up from 4 layers, and they're printed on, I can't really tell if they're really heavy cardstock or like a thin plywood veneer. But either way, they look great. They really look the part. They weather up nice. They're very substantial. And while they actually look nicer than the real doors on the Rico engine house, sometimes it's one of those things where if you try to do the prototype too realistically, it actually starts looking not realistic. And then these roof vents, those were not the most fun thing I've ever done, but they were hand carved from balsa each one. And then I used evergreen styrene metal sheathing for the roofs there. And then overall, the roof is done with tissue paper, long strips of tissue paper to represent tar paper. Looking over here, this is the Banta kit for the coal house, the coal shed and outhouse. Here's that little fenced-in park. Mine didn't quite fit as a square, so I did mine at an angle. And then, of course, this is actually a fire hose shed, believe it or not. And I scratch built that when I was in high school, so that's something I've kept for a while. And then the other scratch building job I just did was this guy right here. This is the Rico Sandhouse. Not too many pictures of this structure, so I used the Blazek plan, and I think I made it too wide, but you know, whatever. Again, this is one of those structures that I had the plan for, but no dimensions, so I had to do some guesstimation. But you can see it's just made out of styrene, lots of heavy styrene parts in there, so pretty substantial. And it's not commonly modeled, so it's kind of fun to have the room to do it. And of course, coming back around into Ridgeway. So originally the engine house tracks at Rico connected to the south end of the yard until they were washed out in I think 1911 or so with one of those big floods, or 1920. There was a big flood, one of the 5 major floods of the Dolores River. So by my era, you could actually see where the track was stub-ended and abandoned, so I'm going to try to model that. This will all be blended together when it's scenic together. And then coming around to the lift-out bridge, there's going to be the Rico stock pens and so on. So that's the progress. I know, a long update. And just to prove to you that this stuff works, I'm going to turn on the system here. And we got a little passenger train here. So there you go. So I hope to see you next time, as I hope to have made a lot more progress next time as well. And in the meantime, keep enjoying Narrow Gauge, and I'll be posting to Facebook. Thanks.